So when the Europeans invaded Africa, they stole people. That's why we have people of African descent in different parts of the world today. That's one of the reasons, major reasons. And number two, they stole property. And as we talk, there's so many African artifacts all across Europe. Now, my question for you today is, where do African artifacts in European stores, in museums, where do they belong?
These artifacts, who do they belong to?
They belong to the museums where they are now, because there are laws, And if even for the artifacts which were looted in the 19th century, the war, there was laws, and the looting of war was legal. Maybe it's not moral, but it's legal. And if you want to come back on this, why don't you come back 19th century, 17th century, 16th century? You cannot stop. You don't know where to stop.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. So into today's episode, we're going to talk about a very controversial topic here. And something is wrong somewhere. We're going to talk about something crazy. I don't know how an action of looting or stealing can be justified just because the thief, that person, the looter, does not want to return what they stole from you, or because they do not want to ask for forgiveness, to be apologetic, and they're trying to find a means to justify their theft. Now, someone once said in a video that the only reason there are pyramids in Africa today is because it was impossible for Europeans to pick them and carry them to Europe. Had it been possible, we would not have pyramids in Egypt and in Sudan and in Africa today. And I believe in that. I have a video here of this Frenchman who thinks that African artifacts that were stolen during colonization of Africa cannot be repatriated to Africa. He's trying to justify that they should be in Europe. So without wasting much of your time, let's watch this video. And at the end of this video, we'll talk about why it is necessary to return, this is crazy, to return to Africa what belongs to Africa. So first, I will show you the video. So let's jump right into the video.
These artifacts, who do they belong to?
They belong to the museums where they are now, because there are laws, And if even for the artifacts which were looted in the 19th century, the war, there was laws, and the looting of war was legal. Maybe it's not moral, but it's legal. And if you want to come back on this, why don't you come back 19th century, 17th century, 16th century? You cannot stop. You don't know where to stop.
At the time, they weren't independent countries.
Yes.
So, of course, the colonial power can decide to take stuff. I mean, it is looting, isn't it?
No. It is looting, yes. Part of it was looting. But if you have read the report, I did read the report in English because I didn't get the French version. And the report says it's not only the war looting which must be returned, but everything. The scientific expeditions where they collected artifacts, they must give it back. The gifts from the colonial administration, you must give it back. Actually, you are going to give back to some countries, and they are not reclaiming it because it's only the Benin which reclaim the artifacts, not the other ones.
Only Benin is claiming it.
Yes.
And that raises the other question, how do we get African kids to see their own artifacts?
Yes, you can do this, I think I milite for cooperation between French museums and Africa to organize exhibitions of art, African art. You can organize exhibitions permanently.
And how does that go? Because there's the question of... Yes. The pieces when they travel around Africa, does it go okay?
Yes, it's okay to send them to Africa, but they must return to the French museums where they belong.
So why is there this promise from Emmanuel Macron?
I don't know. You must ask him. But I think he was like a witch who doesn't know what he does, you know. But because he says we are going to give it back, as if these artifacts belong to. It doesn't belong to anyone but the French museums. And it's very interesting because we saw an example in Senegal. You know, I think it was a museum in Senegal. In Senegal, you have a museum, IFAN Museum, which has in its collections many works of art from many other countries from Africa, and it was a collection built during the colonial era. Are they going to give it back to the other countries, this museum in Senegal? I don't think so.
But if they were stolen...
No, they were not stolen. It was looting, yes, but there were law.
I don't get this distinction between looting and stealing.
No, it was stolen if you want, but in the 19th century, in the 18th century, in the 17th century, during all the wars, art was stolen. So we must give back everything or nothing. And more of this, these works of art, when they were taken, if they were not taken, they would have disappeared because many of artifacts, African artifacts, are made of wood, and it was not made to be kept, you know. So it would have disappeared. They became works of art in museums because Europeans said it's art, you know. It's not from Africa. It was not art. It was meant to disappear.
Right. These artifacts who, would have disappeared in the past,
yes,
but don't anymore. You talked about exhibiting more of these works in Africa.
Yes.
What do you do to help African countries to have proper museums that are with the proper funding so that they can keep things climate controlled and to preserve the works when they go over there? What needs to be done?
They need advice from people who know what is a museum, who know to build them. So we know this and we can help them to do this. And even in the report, they say that there are 500 museums in Africa. Maybe. So maybe there are already museums which can conserve these works of art. But we must help them. There are much money from France to Africa, and it's good for helping Africa. Maybe part of this money...
I was going to say, Didier, because you were on a panel here where you were very critical when there was the opening of the Louvre in Abu Dhabi,
yes,
saying France's cultural diplomacy was misguided. What can the French government do specifically when it comes in this regard? Should they be devoting more energy to Africa to help them?
They can help Africa. I don't see why they could not help Africa when they are renting their collections to Abu Dhabi, you know, because Abu Dhabi has money and Africa has less money. I think we must help Africa. It's not the point. The point is we must not return art which actually doesn't belong to them.
All right, Didier.
That's simply crazy, as you have heard. So a man fighting with all that amount of energy to justify, I don't know what fight is there to be fought. He's justifying how much what was looted from their rightful owners cannot in any way belong to the rightful owner. African artifacts do not belong to Africa. How does that even sound? I mean, that just sounds right because it is Africa. Try saying it in a way like French artifacts do not belong to France because there are so many African artifacts in France. Um, uh, British artifacts do not belong to Britain because there's also so many African artifacts, including skulls, human skulls of Africans that they tortured and unalived during colonization, are still in museums, in stores, and in people's houses, and in England, in France, in Belgium, across Europe today. It just sounds right because it feels like everybody can just pick anything from Africa, and it's crazy. Now, it got me thinking, And something else that I find so crazy about what he's talking. So African art becomes art because the European think or call that art. Really? So African art is art because they say it is art. That's crazy. Again, something else he has just said is it would have disappeared. The artifact that is in stores in Europe would have disappeared. Bring back what belongs to us. If we don't keep it properly, if we want it to disappear, what's wrong with that? It is ours. We can do whatever we want with our property. If they can have their own artifact and they can keep them for millions of years if they wish. But bring back to us and let us keep for ourselves because that is our heritage. Why is it important that we repatriate African artifacts back to Africa? He doesn't believe it should be because who is it benefiting? Returning Africa's stolen artifacts is, essential for several reasons that relate to cultural identity, historical justice, education, and decolonization of knowledge. Let's just quickly talk about each one of them. So cultural identity and heritage. Artifacts like sculptures, the masks, jewelry, and religious objects are integral parts of our culture, African culture. Returning back that belongs to us is us reuniting with our cultural identity and our cultural heritage. You know, then let's talk about historical justice and reconciliation. The artifacts in European museums are largely acquired through colonialism, often taken under exploitative and violent circumstances. You know, returning these items is one step to towards acknowledging and addressing the historical wrongs of colonialism of the European imperialist. It's as simple as that. Educational empowerment. So when African artifacts are displayed only in Europe, in France, in England, in Germany, in European museums, Africans are denied access to their own cultural history and heritage. For younger generations in Africa, having this in our local museum provides opportunities for learning, inspiring a sense of our pride and connection to our own history, to our own past. Decolonization of the mind, decolonization of knowledge is another thing. European institutions often interpret and present African artifacts, Africans, and everything African from a European perspective, a Eurocentric point of view, which can distort meaning and significance or the importance of our artifacts, of our culture, of our history, of our heritage. And by returning our artifacts back to Africa, African countries have their opportunity to present their cultural narratives in our own voices, in our own point of view, in our own perspective. That what we essentially advocate for in this channel, telling African stories from an African perspective. Overall, returning African artifacts is just more than relocating objects. It is about rectifying historical injustice. It is restoring our cultural agency. It is about empowering African societies and to tell our own stories, to preserve our own heritage. you know in our own terms. Europeans stole not only the people, the black people that are outside of Africa today, they stole artifacts, they stole land. It's only that the mass of Africa as a land could not be lifted and placed somewhere in the middle of Europe. So I think this is something we need to keep talking about. I know this has been a subject that has been being talked about in terms of our empower people that have African heritage, have African descendants, will and are trying to find a means of returning back to the motherland. But because objects like artifacts have not that the ability like people to move, then we need to, as black people, to call for that, to fight for that. And because it is definitely going to be a fight, as you have heard. So that is what I had for you today in this video. Please share what you think about this in the comments, like and share this video, and if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. So until next time, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.